All right, we've been in 1 Thessalonians for a little while. If you may remember some of why we are here and what this is all about. Paul is writing to a church that probably he was only serving sort of as an itinerant pastor for anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks. Yet these people had a clear vision of who Paul was. Now I want to tell you a little bit about this church. This is a church that is now doing what a church ought to be doing. They are faithful, they're out there on the streets, they're telling the story of Jesus Christ, they're doing the work of ministry. They're not just doing programs, they're doing ministry. And Paul has sent Timothy and Silas back to this place and to find out what's going on. Why? Why is he not going? Because he's been run out of town. And if he comes back, his life will be in danger. Why was he run out of town? Even the short period of time he was there, he was effective for the gospel of Jesus Christ. So they ran him out of town. And now he sends Timothy and Silas back in there, and they come back and they go, Paul, you know, I know that you were fearful because you were there such a short time, but let me tell you, this church in that short period of time got the message, and they're out there doing the work of ministry. And you can be proud and excited for them, because they're doing what God has called them to do. Now, in the short period of time that Paul was there, though, he did run across some people that questioned his motives. It's a dangerous thing to question people's motives. You know why? Because you can never see them. You don't know what their motives are. And so questioning someone's motives is a very dangerous thing to do. But yet there were some in Thessalonica that had questioned Paul's motives. So this is one of 2 churches I can think of right off the bat that Paul said, I'll never receive any giving, any money, any help from these people again. If I go to somebody's house for dinner, I'm going to pay for dinner. Why? Because somebody had questioned his motives, and he says, I don't want ever to be a chance of anybody ever questioning my motives. So I won't accept any gifts from them. He would accept it from Philippi. He would not accept it from Corinth. He would accept it from other places. Why? Because their hearts were right about giving to ministry. And so now he sees that they are working, but yet he says, you know that while I was there and while my motives were being questioned, that I would never receive anything from you. I worked to work my way through to make sure that nobody would ever question the fact that why I was there was to share Christ with people. So he didn't want anybody questioning his motives. And this was one of the reasons that Paul is writing back to them now. He's wanting them to know that they too have a mission. They too have a purpose, some objectives that God's got for them. So let's just run through real quickly where we've already been before. The apologetic theme, the historical correlation between Acts and 1 Thessalonians. I've already quoted Acts many times already in the series of messages so far. Go back and look at Acts and look, if you really want to get a picture of who Paul is, go back and read in Acts chapter 20 as he addresses the Ephesian elders and he's ending that relationship. He says, you know, I'll never see you again. It shows the heart of Paul for ministry and for these people he loves. The ecclesiastical, in other words, the church-oriented theme of this for a healthy, growing church. We see in Thessalonica a healthy, growing church. Even though they had this issue, this question, or at least one person in the congregation had the issue. Now, I tell you, I've got people that I will never accept any money from. I will never accept any charity from. Particular individuals that I will not. Simply because they have questioned my motives over the years. That's the nature of doing ministry. Not everybody is going to think that you've got their best interest at heart. There's going to be somebody in every crowd that questions your motives. That's not unusual. So if you're thinking about in ministry, get used to the idea your motives will be questioned somewhere along the line. There's a pastoral theme here because Paul is reaching out to them, congratulating them for the work that they're doing that's genuinely of God, and he's doing these shepherding activities, and he has a shepherd's attitude. And then there's an eschatological theme, which is one of the reasons we started 1 Thessalonians. What is eschatological theme? Eschatology is end times, and we're going to get to that. We're working through some things here on the front end, but Paul's going to get to a place that he addresses these people, and he tells them, here's what's going to happen. Since we're dealing with the book of Revelation on Wednesday nights, I wanted you to see what's going to happen before the book of Revelation takes place. And so when we get to this place, we're going to see the rapture. And so Paul is telling them all these things on the front end and thanking them for their good work and preparing them for the truth. And that yet there are some false teachers among them that are teaching some false things. And Paul wants them to know, no, you don't have to worry about what's going to happen from our perspective, looking back the book of Revelation. Why? Because you're going to be out of here. You as believers are going to be raptured out of here. And that's the promise of God, that he will remove his church from a place before there's the devastation that's going to come. And he's going to deal with that. Yeah, there ought to be some amens in the crowd. And then there's a missionary theme. I love the missionary themes. I'm a missionary at heart. This is a mission field. Right here in Redway, California, this is a mission field. We think about mission fields all being foreign. We've been to some mission fields in this country. And let me tell you, some of the mission fields in this country are more difficult than the mission fields that we've been to in Africa and Russia and around the world. We've got a mission to do here. And listen, every one of you, I'm going to say it to you again. Many times I've said this to you before, but every single Christian has a ministry. We get confused. We think ministers are the only ones with ministries. And that's not the biblical message at all. The biblical message is every Christian has a ministry. You have something to do for Christ, and he has gifted you for that purpose. That's the missionary gospel that's taking place here. So there's some key elements here. We've been talking about faith, hope, and love the last couple of weeks. Faith, hope, and love. What are they? We don't have time to review all of that, but if you hadn't been here for that series of messages, so many times it's not going to be what you think it is. The biblical message of faith is not a bold, great leap across a chasm into darkness. That is never the biblical message of what faith is. Faith is always a small step into the light. God has given us reasons, and he's given us evidence for his existence and for following him. And he says, no, you don't. To take a large leap into the darkness is foolish. Why? Because the enemies exist in the darkness as well, and he will tempt you to make that leap. It's a leap maybe not where God would have you to go. In fact, it's very likely not where God would have you to go. But the key elements here of faith, hope, and love are key to this, and the love is the culmination of all of this. And so this morning we're going to focus in on love again, and I want you to see the nature of love, how it plays out in real life. This is not something that's just been talked about as an idea to think about. Paul is giving this to us as a real element that we need to be measuring our own pulse and seeing, am I alive in love? That's what he's doing here. So hang on, we got a lot to get through this morning. Christian faith, the last time we talked about Christian faith, the expectancy of a labor of love. Love is always a labor. Love is never stagnant. It's never dormant. A dormant love is not love. A love that's in word only is not love. Love is a bold step of action that says, I believe what I'm saying I believe. And I believe that when God shows me that I need to be about his business and doing what he calls me to do, in spite of the fact that it doesn't look like a very smart thing in a worldly sort of way, I'm making that step. That's where I'm going. It's a labor of love. The very action that's required to exhibit biblical love is called ministry. Another word that's translated for this Greek word that's translated ministry is service. Diakonos. It's where we get the word deacon. Diakonos. It's a word that means to serve others at your own expense. It costs us something to serve. And listen, love will always cost you something. Biblical love will always cost you. I'm not talking about a phony kind of feel-good kind of thing that we think about love being. I'm talking about biblical love. It will cost you. It will be the most joyous cost you will ever expense in your life, but it will cost you. It's a labor of love. Paul uses his own example at Thessalonica to illustrate how the concept of serving ministry works. So we're going to take a look at that. By studying Paul's reminiscence, he's thinking back about the time that he was there, we can learn the things to do and the things not to do, and to have that be the understanding of what serving love actually looks like. A serving love. If we can get a pattern this morning of what that looks like, then we can go back and begin to measure how am I existing here? Am I thriving in this love that God's called me to? I'm going to be able to put my finger on the pulse and see if I can begin to identify what it ought to look like. And that's our purpose here this morning, is to talk about that. So let's look at the text. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, beginning in verse number 1. You know, brothers, that our visit to you was not a failure. This brief 3 to 6 week period of time Paul was there, he says, I'm looking back on that now, and I was thinking, boy, maybe there was things that I needed to continue to do, but you got it. And you're doing it. And you're stepping out on faith, and you're stepping out in service, and you're doing what God has called you to do. And he says, it was not a failure that I came to you and I spent even that short period of time with you. We had previously suffered and been insulted in Philippi. The reason he was in Thessalonica is because he'd been run out of Philippi. And then he gets run out of Thessalonica. Let me say it again. Why? Because he was effective with the gospel of Jesus Christ. As we look at the book of Revelation, the book of Revelation is written from the Isle of Patmos because John in Ephesus was effective in the ministry of Jesus Christ. It always will cost you something to be an effective minister. You can count on it. And I tell you that not to frighten you, but to prepare you mentally, because if you're not prepared, you can be like so many people I see that get smacked in the face with some reality that they were not expecting, and then they go, whoa, I didn't sign up for this. I'm out of here. And they leave the service of the Lord. It's what's happened to the church in America. David O. made this statement last Wednesday night, I believe, that we are so spoiled that we've missed the boat of what service really is. We are so tender and so weak that we miss the idea of what service is. And any kind of cost, if it's just an insult somebody hurls your way, I didn't sign up for this job. That's the least of these people's worries. Listen to what he says. We previously suffered and been insulted in Philippi, as you know, but with the help of our God, we dared to tell you his good news in spite of the strong opposition. Let me tell you what they suffered in Philippi. Let me tell you what they suffered in Thessalonica. The believers there were beaten. The worst beatings you could get in those days were beatings with rods. And they were beat with rods to the point that their bones were broken, their internal organs were exposed through their skin. These guys had taken a beating unlike anything that we can imagine. He said, we suffered that, and yet we left Philippi. Think about this now. We left Philippi, and we came to you in Thessalonica, and we dared to step up and go, well, let's see what happens here. And they did the same thing to Paul again and ran him out of town. Paul says, we were faithful in spite of the fact of what we had suffered in Philippi. We came to you and we shared the gospel. And it was not a failure. It was not a failure. That's the message that Paul wanted to bring to them. He says, tell his good news in spite of strong opposition. And Paul is thankful for the fact that they are telling the good news. The word good news there, by the way, is euangelion. Euangelion is news, and euon is good. It is the good news. What is the good news? Jesus Christ died. He buried. He atoned for your sins. He was resurrected from the grave, and in his resurrection there is newness in life for you. That's the gospel. That's the euangelion. That's the good news. Verse 4 says, we speak as messengers who have been approved by God to be entrusted with the good news. We have stepped up. We have taken the abuse and the persecution. We have taken the beatings, and we've just gone to the next town, and we've stood up and done the same thing again before similar people. Why? Because it's the good news. And I want you to know the good news. I'm so proud of these guys out at the prison. Why is that little congregation growing? Why have we got over 10% of the entire camp now coming to Christian services? Because these guys have gone out and told the good news in spite of the persecution. In the face of strong persecution. And what happens? This guy shows up yesterday. His name's Brian. And Brian shows up late because he's been in Saw class. And he walks in, and he sits on the back row, and he crosses his arms and his legs, and he looks like he's been weaned on a pickle. I mean, this guy looks sour. This guy looks rough, and he's a big guy. He's sturdy, let's say that. I wouldn't want to meet this guy in a dark alley. He's a big boy. We got ready to go out for the baptism, and so he was late, and he hadn't said a word. And so I let him walk out ahead of me. I think I was afraid to let him walk out behind me. But he walked out ahead of me, and we went out, and we did the baptisms. And he looked up, and he finally smiled, because he'd had this terrible look on his face. He said, I think I was just in time. He said, these guys here, he pointed to 3 of them. He says, these guys here have been working on me for about 6 months. And we had 2 last week that had walked in after some time. Now those guys went back and they said, it's worth to come. Come on over. It's worth coming to hear the good news of Jesus Christ. So that's what it is to go out and serve. That's what it is to be a messenger. That's what it is, this love. That's what it looks like. These guys are exhibiting not just courage in the face of physical and verbal abuse, but it's exhibiting love. This is what it looks like. And for some of them, it cost them last week. One young man that's going to be here in a few weeks to give a testimony told me, says, this experience we've had in the last couple of weeks here, it's cost me something. I said, yep. And it'll cost you again. Verse 9 says, night and day we toiled to earn a living. Why? Because I wasn't going to ask you for any money. I wasn't going to accept any money from you. Why? Because it was questioned. My motives were questioned. We covered our own expenses so that it wouldn't be a burden to you, to anyone, as we preach God's good news. Romans 1:16 says, for I am not ashamed of the good news, the euangelion, about Jesus Christ. It is the power of God at work, rescuing everyone who believes, Jews first and also Gentiles. This euangelion is the message that changes lives. It is the message that changes lives. Listen, I figured this out a little while ago. It's not the messenger that stands before you that changes lives. It's the euangelion, the good news, that changes lives. That's the work of ministry. God working through you to save people come to know Jesus Christ. The good news, God has solved our problem. What is our problem? You're a sinner. You can't fix it. He fixed it. That's the problem solved. That oneness with Him is now possible. Think about that. Your oneness with God Almighty is possible based on what Christ has done at the cross. Not on any goodness on your part, but on what Christ has done at the cross. That atonement for your sins and for my sins. And now you can be one with Christ. Now you can have this oneness with God, listen, without any fear. As you stand before Him, it is without fear, even though He is holy and perfect and you are a lowly sinner. You can stand before Him because Christ made the price paid in full. That's the good news. We had previously suffered and been insulted in Philippi. In spite of the strong opposition, you keep telling the good news. There is always going to be spiritual warfare in sharing the good news. There will always, this is a promise, always be spiritual warfare in sharing the good news. Expect it. Understand where it's coming from. Because in understanding where it's coming from, we can receive the truth and stand on the truth in spite of the challenges. No matter, even if they're as difficult and destructive as they were at the time of Paul. And none of us, I think, have ever suffered that, but we may. You think I might be exaggerating here. We may. We're already a pretty unpopular group of people, those of us called Christ followers. Verse 3, so you can see that we were not preaching with any deceit or impure purposes or trickery. No deceit. What is deceit? The Greek word is plane. Now I want you to listen to me very carefully here because this is an important fact. It's critically important as we talk about things like Christian apologetics and hermeneutics, how to interpret the Word of God and all of that. So listen to me carefully. The word plane can mean either error or purpose deception. Paul has the intent of saying neither one of these are acceptable. It's not acceptable that you preach a gospel that is a false gospel. It's not acceptable even if you think it's right. Even if you think what you're teaching is true. He is saying that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to be purposely deceptive, but it's also not acceptable to teach error. Why do you think that I so fear standing here every Sunday morning and Wednesday night and out at the mission and out at the prison every single week? Why? Why is that a fear for Dave Seaford? Because this is true, that an error spoken from my mouth is not acceptable before God, even if it's given thinking that it's the truth. Why do I spend 40 hours plus working on a Sunday morning message and about the equivalent on a Wednesday night message? Why do I do that? Why did I spend 60 hours plus preparing for what I did at the mission last week, speaking for 3 hours? Because I want to be as sure as I possibly can that I'm not delivering to you error. Does that mean I'll be perfect? No, it doesn't. And when I'm not, I'll stand before you when shown to be wrong and admit to you and ask for your forgiveness. But I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that what I do standing before you is without error. Because Paul says it's unacceptable. This word plane, it can mean just error, and error from lack of studying and trying to get it right before God. Why do I spend the time? That's why. Correct hermeneutics, interpretation of what the Word of God actually says is actually important. I get very angry at these guys that tell me, preachers, I stand up on Sunday morning and I just wait for the Spirit to move. Exactly right. What Spirit? That's not spirituality, that's spiritual laziness. And Paul says it's not acceptable. This plane A is unacceptable. It must be true in intent and it must be true in fact to stand before God's people and give the message. Impure purposes. Do you know there's popular people on television that are broadcast worldwide that have been shown to be purposely deceiving you, bringing impure purposes for their own aggrandizement, for their own glory, for their own financial well-being? And he says that's not acceptable. I didn't stand before you with that. I've never done this self-serving, he says. And I've never gone about it with trickery. You know, there's a fine line between doing proper ministry and discipling people and manipulating them. And I spend a great period of my life discerning where that line is so that I don't cross over into manipulation. I want you to be discipled, but therefore I will tell you the truth, and sometimes that truth hurts. But I never want to be caught rightly bringing trickery and manipulation into the pulpit and into ministry. I told the guys yesterday out at the prison, I said, some of you guys getting ready to leave here. One of the guys, Rob, is going to be leaving after next Saturday. The next Saturday will be his last day. And I told him, I said, you're getting ready to leave here and you've asked me to be your mentor. That discipleship that I will do with you is in your court. It's not in mine. You want to be discipled, you call me. You make yourself available. And I will disciple you. But I'm not going to chase you to disciple you. Not going to do it. Why? Because that gets into this idea of I've got to get this person to do this, and then manipulation begins to creep in. You want to be discipled, find a person to disciple you and be discipled. And let me just say again to you what I've said to the men several times, and I might as well say it to the whole group. If you're not mentoring someone in their Christian faith and being mentored by someone in your Christian faith, you are not yet a discipler and not yet a disciple of Jesus Christ. You need to be about the Lord's business, and that's the way you grow spiritually. It's iron sharpening iron. It's the work of God's Word invested into your life, and another person's experience moving in you to sharpen you and make you available to sharpen someone else. That's God's plan. That's not Dave's plan. That's what discipleship is. You know what a disciple is? You know what the word disciple means? Anybody? It means a learner. A disciple is a learner. He says, I don't use any of these things. You want to be discipled? Find you a discipler. No manipulation. Verse number 4. For we speak as messengers who have been approved by God to be entrusted with the good news. Oh, wow. To be entrusted by God to be a messenger of the good news. Let me give you a message this morning. That is you. If you're a Christ follower, you've been entrusted by God to be a messenger of the good news. You are a messenger of the euangelion. You are a messenger for the Most High God. Our purpose is to please God and not people. Boy, there's a big message, isn't it? That one-liner right there. Our mission is to please Him. Well, why don't you do this, Pastor? And why don't you do that? And why don't you twist this around and tell that and do something else? And because my message and my mission is to please Him and not men. That's why. He who is one who examines the motives of the heart, it is only God that is to examine the motives of the heart. That's not your job and it's not my job. We can never properly examine someone's motives. We don't know, but He does, and He knows perfectly what those motives are. Galatians 1:10 says, am I now seeking the favor of men or of God? Or am I striving to please men? If I were still striving to please men, I would not be a bondservant of Jesus Christ. I would not submit myself to His authority as master and Lord over me if that's my job and that was what I was after. No, I'm not. I'm here to please God and not men. Number 5, verse 5. Never once did we try to win you with flattery. Do you know you can do that? You can win people over with flattery. As you well know, I didn't do that. Paul is speaking to these people that were there when he was there, and so he's very likely telling the truth. Why? Because they could call him out on it if that wasn't the truth. He says, I didn't try to win you with flattery. Most of you know that. I told you the truth. Even when it hurt, I told you the truth. And God is our witness that we were not just pretending to be your friends so you would give us money. No, in fact, we never would receive any from them. Free of the profit motive. As for praise, we have never asked for it from you or anyone else. That is the glory motive. All of this, he says, I set aside. As apostle of Christ, we certainly had the right to make some demands of you. Listen to this. As an apostle of Jesus Christ, one who was trained up by Christ and authorized to go preach the gospel, he says, we would have had the right to come in and demand certain things of you in this place. He says, yet we never did that. We had a right to make demands of you, but we were as gentle among you, listen, as a mother feeding and caring for her own children. One translation says, as a mother nursing her baby. That's how gentle we were with you. Now, Paul is going to evoke the picture of a mother and the picture of a father in the coming verses. He's saying, I was your parents. Both the father and the mother's role, I administered to you. The nurturing of a mother, how gentle that is. As we loved you so much that we shared with you not only God's good news, not only God's message of forgiveness and salvation, but our own lives we invested in you as well. Have you ever heard the saying in Christian circles, I was pouring my life into this person? That's a phrase that around the South is big in churches. I had this young person, and I was pouring my life into this person. That's what Paul said he was doing here. The short time I was with you, I poured my life into you. I have prayed for you since. I have given everything that I could give to you. And that you are a witness to. That is who I am. I've not only shared the good news with you, I put my life on the line. I've given it all. That's who I am because of Christ. Pouring out his life and investing into people personally. This is what discipleship looks like. Discipleship is pouring your life into someone else. It is giving. It is giving to the point of sacrifice. Let me make a statement. Listen to this statement very carefully. You listening? Say amen. Amen. Ministry is never at your convenience. Ministry is never without sacrifice. Ministry will cost because it's invested coming out of love. Service to God. That's the point Paul is trying to get across here. Teaching truth in context of the close personal relationship. That's what discipleship means. Teaching truth in the context of a close personal relationship. Let me show you what discipleship looks like. Ephesians 4:14 and 15. As a result, we are no longer to be children, tossed to and fro by the waves, carried about by every wind of doctrine, but speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects unto Him who is the head, even Christ. Speaking the truth in love. Sometimes speaking the truth in love will cost you personally because it means you will have to invest in that person further beyond the words that you're speaking to them. And sometimes it will cost you personally because they don't want to hear what you got to say. But it's given in love. And I'm convinced that if it is indeed given in love, those unpopular messages that something needs to change in your life, I believe wholeheartedly if it's given in love, that it may hurt that person emotionally, but it is helpful to them spiritually, and there will always be a respect that is engendered in a gospel-driven love for you because of that. I've had some people say some very unpopular things to me, unpopular to me. And it hurt me personally, emotionally. I'm thinking of one event where one person had that conversation with me. And I dearly, dearly, dearly love that person. Because not only did they have the guts to share that with me, but they had the love for me that was demanded to tell me what I needed to hear at a very difficult time. That's what biblical love looks like. That's what ministry demands. Truth in love. Thirdly, discipleship is facilitating others' quest to become more Christ-like. Here's what that looks like. It is slow. It is agonizingly slow process. It is not an totally beautiful upward trajectory. Spiritual growth. It's bumpy. And sometimes it takes nosedives. And we don't quit. We continue as long as that person desires to be discipled to give to them. That's what it looks like. It's slow. It's not showy. In fact, most people looking at it don't even know what is going on. When people walk in here during the week and they hear me on the phone with this one person back in North Carolina, they don't have a clue what's going on. Discipleship is going on. That's what's going on. It's not a you don't walk in and go, "Whoo, that's discipleship." You walk in and go, "Well, pastor's on the phone." It's not showy, but it leads to multiplication. It leads to others becoming disciplers. That's what happens. Verse 9. Don't you remember, dear brothers and sisters, how hard we worked among you? Night and day, he says, we worked among you. We toiled to earn a living so that our expenses would not be a burden to anyone there as we preach God's good news. We toiled night and day. 2 Thessalonians, we'll get over there in a few months, maybe a year. For you yourselves know how you ought to follow our example, because we did not act in an undisciplined manner among you. We didn't run helter-skelter among you. We didn't run just we came in and shared the good news and then made the next step with you and made the next step to help you make the first step, and we continued to make these movements among you. Verse number 8. Nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying. Can you imagine? Paul's in town. this famous Christian person that's been converted from being a Jew. And he's in town, and everybody at the church is excited. And you invite him to dinner. And he comes to your house and he says, here's a 20. And you go, no, I don't want your money. And you go, no. You can take my money, my 20, or I'm going home. He says, I refused to receive anybody's gift in Thessalonica. Why? Because there was a contingency when I was here that questioned my motives. He says, you know I didn't even eat bread with you without paying for it. I labored hard. I kept working night and day so that we would not be a burden to any of you. Not because we do not have the right to this, but in order to offer ourselves as a model for you so that you would follow our example. Modeling is how discipleship is done. Modeling. Modeling's tough. Here's the reference to the Father. And you know that we treated each of you as a father treats his own children. So now he's talked about the nurturing of a mother. What does the father's encouragement look like? He says, we pleaded with you, we encouraged you, and we urged you. The Father is teaching to live your lives in the way that God would consider worthy. For he called you into his kingdom to share his glory. Here's the encouragement of the Father. Pleaded, encouraged, and urged. Direct pleading and persuading is not manipulation. It is discipleship. He called you into his kingdom to share his glory. Here's what serving love looks like. Number one, it's counterintuitive. It doesn't seem often to be the kind of thing that you want to do. It's not attractive. It's not without a cost. It's based on the gospel. It's based on the good news. It's based on the good news of Jesus Christ. It's not based on what you want to teach. It must have integrity. It's the reason that I won't take gifts. We got ready to leave North Carolina, and this one guy that's very wealthy had approached me and said, you know, I'd like to give you this gift as you leave. And I knew this guy had been talking kind of behind my back about my motives. And it was a large gift. And it would have been nice to have financially. And I told him, no, I can't accept that. No, I want to give you this. No. Why? Because I know behind the scenes what was going on. I'd already had 3 people come and tell me. I won't take it. You must have integrity in what you do. Honest and truthful. It's not self-serving. It's always relational, and that'll cost you. And it's supremely valuable. I'm going to finish with this. The good news is only because of the price that Jesus Christ paid on the cross. It's only good news because of that. That cost Christ not just his life on the cross and suffering on the cross. That pales in comparison, listen to me very carefully, to the fact that when he died on that cross, the purpose of his death was infused in every fiber of his being, and that's called our sin. And what he did on the cross is the reason this is supremely valuable. And once we get that, we can begin to make a difference in a world that desperately needs to hear the good news. Because it is his payment on the cross, his atonement for your sins and for mine, that is the reason that your work for him is supremely valuable. It's not about you, it's all about him. And when we get that, we can understand what we are doing is critical and it's important. It's not only important, it is the most important thing that we're here for in life. That's why we're here. We're here to share the good news, and it's the most valuable thing in the face of the earth, or in the heavens, or anywhere in the universe and beyond the universe. It's the most valuable thing anyone can have. Listen, and you've got it to share with somebody else. That's good news. That is extremely good news.